Put your hands together for Joan Pinto, America's editor, Carbon Pulse.
Ready to go? Is the mic on?
You're live.
We are. Good morning. My name is Joan Pinto, and I'm the America's editor for Carbon Pulse, your trusted market intelligence for all things carbon. We cover global compliance and voluntary markets, and our newest product, the Nature and Biodiversity Pulse, was launched December 2022. Earlier this month, we celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we have a team of about 35 reporters across the world. And I'm told among us, we have about 100 years of journalistic experience. Our co-founder is Mike Szabo. He's here visiting. This is one of his favorite conferences to come to the US. And we also have our Chief Strategy Officer, Sonia Van Rensen, visiting from Brussels. I'm privileged and honored to share the stage with this distinguished panel of regulators, whom we can all agree have been market influencers in the last little while. But they hold all the answers to help traders and market people navigate through these complex markets and the regulations that surround them. So I know we've started about 5 minutes late, but we're going to try and divide the hour into two sections. 40 minutes of output from us, and then 20 minutes of input. Within the 40 minutes, we'll try to target 3 specific areas. One is the change. What are the changes some of these programs have encountered in the last little while? What are the challenges that the regulators are facing on many different fronts, we know, through rulemaking delays, through legislative intervention, through getting the ETS operational in Mexico's case. And then we'll look forward. What is, for the new chapter in these programs, what are the regulators looking forward to? What are they expecting? I'll start with a brief introduction, and again, none of these need an introduction. They're very familiar faces. We'll start with Mark Sippola from the Cap and Trade program, who is the chief there at California's Air Resources Board and has over a decade working on the program's design and implementation. And here's the kicker. He was closely involved the last time CARB updated the program in 2016 and 2018. So they're on the same journey, and therefore I think his experience will help us dive into what to expect in the year ahead. Next to Mark is Joel Creswell from the Washington program. He's a program manager there, and Joel does everything. He does, Joel's team, that is, does everything. He oversees Cap and Invest, the Clean Fuel Standard, the Zero Emission Vehicles Program, and HFC reduction. I don't know how you do it and sleep at night. In the course of his career, and here's the important one, Joel has worked on the federal level at the EPA. So point to keep in mind there. On my left here is Andrew McKeon from RGGI, who's the executive director there since 2016. And he oversees day-to-day operations, quarterly allowance auctions, and engages with stakeholders. Here's the important bit. Andrew has also helped guide the participating states through 2 program review processes. And we're on the next journey. And last but not the least is Eduardo Piquero, who's the CEO of Mexico 2, that's the trading platform at the Mexico Stock Exchange. And most of you know him. He's been involved with carbon markets for over 20 years, not just in Mexico, but also as a facilitator through the nascent carbon markets across Latin America. So if you have any questions on Latin America and how the markets are developing there, he's your guy. All right, Mark, let's start with you. And how about you give us a bit about the changes that CARB has undergone with the cap and trade program?
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me today. Thank you for the kind introductions and kind words. It's really good to be with you all. I'm happy to provide some updates on where we are in the California cap and trade program. There hasn't been much recent change to California's cap and trade. It's mature, it's cost-effective program that has been shown to be flexible and resilient. And I think because there's been limited change so far, I want to place that in some broader context. So California is the 5th largest economy in the world, has a long history of adopting policies to improve air quality and fight against climate change. California has 2 statutory targets to reduce GHG emissions for 2045. That's just 20 years away, and the targets are to reduce emissions 85% below 1990 levels and to achieve statewide carbon neutrality. So we've made those commitments, and really what we need to do now is meet those targets in the most cost-effective manner to limit impacts to consumers and businesses. The analyses that we've done for the California's climate change scoping plan indicate that the suite of climate programs that the state has adopted with the cap and trade program as the key policy is the most cost-effective approach to achieving those statutory targets. This was true when we adopted the first scoping plan in 2008, and it's been true for every scoping plan since, including the most recently adopted one in 2022. Due to the flexibility that's inherent to cap and trade systems and their ability to coexist with complementary measures, one change we have seen actually is globally an increase in uptake of these types of programs. The International Carbon Action Partnership, they report that 36 systems are now in place globally, with an additional 22 either in consideration or in development. These include existing systems like New Zealand, South Korea, China, and the UK, and systems under development in places like Turkey, Brazil, India, and Indonesia. This is expanding the reach of carbon markets, offering potential opportunities to coordinate and integrate markets, and it's increasing access to low-cost reductions. It's important that existing programs like California's and the other programs represented here on, on this panel continue as an example of stable, durable, cost-effective climate policy for these other governments. And along those lines, we know that policy certainty is important. It's important to unleashing private investments in decarbonization, and the political signals are important here. So the goal is this long-term fundamental shift in what powers our economy. There may occasionally be short-term uncertainty, day-to-day variability, but the primary purpose of these policies is meeting those targets that are years out. We've got the 2030 target and those 2045 targets that I discussed. And that long-term durability and effectiveness of these programs needs to be clear. So again, there hasn't been much change specifically to California's cap and trade program. It's mature, it's been proven to be a stable and durable market, and it's effectively reducing GHG emissions. We're entering our 13th year of operation with an emissions obligation. We've been linked with the program in Quebec for 11 years. It endured times of political uncertainty in 2016 and 2017, and times of broader uncertainty during the pandemic. It smoothly navigated delinkage with Ontario in 2018. And again, the goal here is reducing the emissions. Price of carbon is getting factored into long-term decision-making by businesses. It's worked together with other regulations and incentives to achieve the target that we had set for 2020. And beyond cost-effectively reducing emissions, there are provisions to mitigate industrial emissions leakage and to alleviate energy cost impacts to consumers and to businesses. And the provisions are ensuring high-road jobs remain in California, and they're providing net financial benefits to electricity customers. So entities have been able to understand the program and comply with the requirements. We've seen 100% compliance rates nearly for every year since the beginning of the program. Just in November, we had compliance for over 850 million metric tons of GHG emissions for the fourth compliance period. We're providing accurate and transparent information on our webpage. Along with our colleagues in Quebec and a third-party market monitor, we're actively monitoring behaviors in the market to ensure rules are followed and market integrity is preserved. And when the program is updated, that's done with thorough planning and with thorough public engagement. And that robust discussion really benefits the final outcome of any changes. So altogether, these design features and these implementation practices are proving to be effective for having an understandable, resilient, and cost-effective program that's getting real reductions. We want to carry those features to serve as a model of successful climate action for other governments that are considering taking their own action. And any changes that we would be making would aim to continue that success.
Thank you, Mark. All right, well, let's hear from Joel on Washington's program and what are some of the changes, recent changes that have transpired.
Yeah, thanks, Joan, and thanks also for the kind introduction. And I will just say to start out that the way that I manage all of those programs is I have a lot of extremely talented staff. So if I look good or sound smart, it's only because they're pretty incredible. As you heard from Leanne and Rajinder and Justin and others earlier, as bureaucrats, we really strive to be boring. I think Mark did a nice job of portraying the California program as relatively boring over the last few years, and Washington's program has been anything but boring of late, but we are really striving for a more boring future. What do I mean by that? Well, I think a lot of people are aware that our program, which is now in its third year, it wasn't certain that it was going to make it this far because there was an initiative on the ballot to repeal it. And that was defeated in November by an overwhelming majority of 62%. So Washingtonians voted strongly in favor of the Cap and Invest program. And some of the reasons for that, at least based on the messaging that we saw at the time, was that people were really inspired by what the investments do for them. I think Washingtonians care about fighting pollution, air pollution, climate pollution, but also when they had the prospect in front of them of repealing a program that provides electric school buses so that children aren't exposed to diesel exhaust, that provides subsidized heat pumps to low-income families that lower their energy bills and reduce fossil fuel pollution, that are moving tribal villages inland because their land is eroding and so they need to move buildings, that is paying for active transportation to make it safe for people to bike and walk to work and school. People didn't want to lose all of those things. So we saw very strong support from the public. That was something that we think is very exciting. And so our program continues on, and we are envisioning a long period of stability as we move forward towards our 2030, 2040, and 2050 greenhouse gas limits, similar to the ones in California. An interesting coincidence is just days before the November election, on November 1st, we held our first ever compliance event where covered entities had to submit 30% of their 2023 emissions. And the compliance with that event was nearly 100%. It was well over 99%. And so in spite of all the turmoil, in spite of how interesting our program has been over the last year or two, still our covered entities understood how to comply. They were buying the allowances that they needed to buy, and they demonstrated robust compliance. That's important for a number of reasons. One of them is that running a strong program is really important as we proceed towards linkage with California and Quebec. We'll talk about that more later on, but that is a really important long-term goal for our program's stability. So some other recent developments. Earlier this month, we held our 9th quarterly auction. We're almost in the double digits. We're very excited about that. The settlement price of that was $50. So our prices were pretty depressed in 2024, and our auction prices have rebounded to a level more consistent with where they were in 2023. That brings the total collected by the program to date to close to $3 billion for the state. And then the final thing I'll say for right now is that we have been seeing increased interest in offset projects. To date, the only offset credits issued in Washington have been for ozone depleting substances projects, but we've been seeing a lot of interest in a variety of protocols. And we have been updating the protocols that we initially adopted wholesale from California, tailoring them to the Washington context. And the first of those is in its proposal phase. That's for the ozone depleting substances protocol, and that's open for comment through next week. Following that, we plan to take on the forestry protocol, and we're exploring a blue carbon protocol. So lots of excitement on the offset front. Anyway, I will wrap up and hand back to Joan.
Thank you so much. All right, let's hear something from Reggie.
Thank you, Joan.
And what are the recent changes?
Thank you for that introduction earlier. I think you might have promoted me to regulator, but in fact, I take orders from the regulatory agencies. I don't give them. But the nature of RGGI is, I think it's a unique organization in that it's a participatory organization. So 10 states participate together in a common auction. They have fungibility of allowances, but they have their own programs. So each state is sovereign in terms of its programs. We had 10 states participating for the first 3 years. Then New Jersey chose to step out for the time being. They stayed out for 8 years, came back in 2020. And then in 2021, Virginia joined, assumed participation. We don't like to use the word join because join implies a compact, and this is not a compact. It is each state having its own program. So Virginia started participating in 2021. And then in the election of the new governor, they decided to pull out, but they did stay for the full control period. So they were there for 21, 22, and 23, stepped out last year. And then Pennsylvania is actually a unique case because technically we still list Pennsylvania as a participating state because they still have a RGGI regulation on their books. But they have not participated in any auctions. They've been under adjudication for 2.5 years. So a lot's still going on there. And things are developing back with Virginia as well, because when the governor pulled out, some environmental groups sued and said, you know, this is illegal. You don't have the authority to take out. There's legislation, RGGI legislation still on the books. So they filed a lawsuit and they won in a court in a local court in Southern Virginia. And the court said it was illegal for Virginia to leave and that it should resume immediately. The governor then appealed that decision to a higher court, and that appeal has now been stayed. Well, I should say the appeal is in effect, and actually the RGGI states did not object to the fact that they would like to see all of the appeals go through before having Virginia come back in, because the last thing the states want is for Virginia to come back in this year in June or September, sell allowances, and then in November find out that they can actually leave. So we want to wait, the states want to wait for all that adjudication to be settled, and then hopefully welcome Virginia back maybe as early as next year. We still have to wait and see. As far as Pennsylvania is concerned, right now we're waiting on the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to make a decision as to whether Governor Shapiro had the authority to enter into a participation in RGGI. Still waiting on that. There's a lot of political headwinds in Pennsylvania against RGGI. So it's going to be sort of a tough road to hoe. If the courts decide no, that the governor didn't have the authority, then he can pursue his statewide program, PACER, which hasn't really gotten the support I think it will need. But if he wins in court, then I think the governor will have to make a decision as to whether he wants to pursue PACER or join RGGI. So a lot of change about participation. There's other things that we'll be talking about, but that's the change piece.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, tell us what's happening with Mexico and what are the changes that have been occurring behind the scenes?
Many changes, fortunately. So on the positive note, you all might know that Mexico is a unique case in Latin America. Mexico exports double the size of exports of Brazil. Our main customer is, of course, the US, and most of the things Mexico sells to the US are made out of energy. So we are Latin America's largest emitter in the industrial sector. Unlike Brazil, with a highly agricultural footprint, our footprint is mostly industrial, and lots of not only American, but European and Asian companies coming to Mexico these days. So we've changed governments recently. We had a not really climate advocate that left office in October last year, but our new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, first female president in Mexico, she's been part of IPCC. So she knows exactly what climate is about, and she knows carbon market, and she knows energy transition. So we're very happy with this new government coming in place in climate terms. Mexico had a ETS pilot phase for 2 years and some months, and that actually stopped during the previous administration, and this new administration has been very advocate and very vocal on starting over its ETS, not as a pilot, but as a real thing, with companies participating, buying and selling offsets. So this is a difference to the previous scheme we had. We would be talking more about offsets rather than credits as allowances during at least the first phase of this new ETS. How it's gonna be like, what it's actually the real thing behind it, how its regulation gonna look like, I still cannot disclose that, nor I do not know anything about it. I just wanna point out what the general direction of the government has been during the last months, the very first of this new administration. What it's really very clear is the new political will. The new Minister of Environment used to be the head of ECLAC, United Nations Economic Office for Latin America. So she's pretty much into climate and carbon pricing, really very importantly. And I'd like to point out something. The new Mexican ETS would have to live together with the local carbon pricing mechanisms that Mexico has developed during the last 3 or 4 years. Mexico has 4 different states with carbon taxes. Those carbon taxes in these 4 different states can be covered using offsets. So exactly as it happens in Colombia or in Chile, so it happens in some subnational entities in Mexico. Those states are the state of Querétaro, with around 400,000 tons that can be compensated, the state of Tamaulipas, with over 5 million tons of offsets that could be used during that scheme, the state of Colima, Mexico's largest port on the Pacific, and very important and strategic with trade with China, that it's a total size of 700,000 tons that could be covered using offsets, and the state of Guanajuato that has even more car-making companies established than the whole Brazil altogether. So it's very important in terms of emissions. It's only 100,000 tons that can be covered using offsets. Altogether, Mexico total offset potential for covering those taxes today, it's over 6 million tons, which is it's quite over what the country is producing with offsets that are currently being sold elsewhere. So Mexico has a unique position, and it's pretty it would demand a lot of attention from the Ministry of Environment, how these different schemes would have to live together with the national ETS in the future. So very interesting times and a very good opportunity for offset projects in Mexico.
Wonderful, thank you. So Mexico will be an exporter of offsets, among other things.
It is right now. It is quite a large exporter of offsets, though I think that's going to change.
So maybe let me start with you in talking about some of those changes, and then we'll go questions that way. So what steps do you know the administration has taken since they've come into office in terms of moving forward with making this a live trading platform?
Not really much today, as of today. So they have been vocal, they have political will, but the Ministry of Environment has suffered a 40% budget cut. So lack of capacities. This is the time for them to make really strategic decisions and to concentrate on what is important. The industry is being very vocal that they need to have something up and going quickly. Right. So let's see if that happens before the end of this year. I'm quite positive, to be honest. This is our crucial moment. We need to have Mexico with an ETS or a regulatory system up and going before the end of this year. I'm very positive on that.
So you're optimistic towards something coming before the end of this year and implemented and operational for 2026?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
But you don't have any indication from the administration if the legislation is moving forward, or the guidelines are on their
good thing is that we wouldn't need a change on the legislation, so it wouldn't need to pass through Congress again. Mm-hmm. It's up to the Ministry of Environment to issue secondary regulation.
Right.
So that's a lot easier for Mexico to have something up and going. I do believe that it's going to be something perhaps simpler than a usual ETS, such as in Washington or California or RGGI. I do believe that it's going to be something only environmentally centered. And that means that the Ministry of Environment wouldn't have to negotiate with the Ministry of Finance because of lacking of time and capacities and so forth. So I would expect something to look more like a cap and offset scheme.
Okay. So that would not involve asking for more budget dollars, in other words.
Correct.
All right. All right. Well, let's move to Andrew. And in terms of change, and you talked about Pennsylvania and Virginia, do you expect any movement from any other states?
Well, we're seeing other states do other things. New York, for example, has an economy-wide program.
Right.
Our understanding is that they will maintain their participation in RGGI even as part of that. And there's actually precedent for other states having other carbon programs in addition to RGGI, so that wouldn't be very complicated. I think, just what the states seem to be facing through this program review, which frankly, I think everyone expected to be over sooner rather than the time it's taking. But a couple of factors, a big change in the federal alignment of mission with RGGI. We went from, the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA as being great tools to help the states along with their RGGI mission. Mm-hmm. It's unclear where those are going and how much of those could be, taken back or limited. So that's one factor of uncertainty and challenge. And I think affordability being a bigger issue coming to the fore, and folks asking questions about that. And I think when you look at the history of RGGI, actually, affordability is something that the states are very proud of, and that the cost of electricity has actually dropped faster in the RGGI states than in the U.S. as a whole. And we imagine that can continue, and certainly with the federal programs that were part of those would be helpful in continuing that. So I don't see any other movement. We are looking forward to seeing the results for Virginia in particular, because if they get a governor elected in November and they get a favorable ruling, they may very well start participating next year.
But you mentioned affordability, and has that been a conversation that's happening between the states as they discuss changes and the third program rule?
The states are, the agencies are facing, concerns about that. And I think that one of the things that has been made clear is that RGGI itself and the price of a RGGI allowance, the influence on the electricity costs is not clear at all. And in fact, when you look at sort of holistically the investment of the proceeds of RGGI in the economy, Analysis Group did a report through 4 control periods where the benefit to the economy, again, this is not an economic development program, but it did $6 billion of economic development due to RGGI in the first 4 control periods, when at that point maybe had raised $2 billion in revenue through the auctions. So I think there's a strong story to tell, but affordability right now seems to be still on the fore of a number of parties and stakeholders.
Is that playing into kind of the extra CCR, tripling of the CCR kind of, is that structure still going to be in place when the rules come out?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is about stability and making sure that there are allowances there should things go in a direction that are not anticipated. So the extra CCR is more seen by the states as an insurance policy to make sure that doesn't happen, that allowances would be run out. But again, as I said, I think the states are in a strong position to talk about the history of RGGI and that it hasn't been costing customers, residential or commercial customers, but actually has been a benefit overall.
Good stuff, thank you. All right, let's talk a little bit about the change in Washington. Actually, I have a question that came in the last week about the updated modeling that on the Washington CFS that is currently, you said, in play. When was that going to be ready? I think it's discussed during 1409.
Right. So on the CFS, the updated modeling is in progress. And so we have to release a report later this spring. I don't have the exact date top of mind, April or May.
Okay.
Looking retrospectively at the cost of the program.
Right.
And then separately, there's some exploration in the bill in the legislature, 1409, looking at doing some more modeling going forward. But that bill is still active in the legislature, so we don't know where it's going to end up. And separately, we're also looking at doing some more robust modeling of our Cap and Invest program as well. Again, also active in a bill in the legislature because modeling is quite expensive, so we have to get the resources to do it.
Right. So is that become more of a current scenario where they're asking for more modeling in terms of how these programs are affecting retail gas prices or electricity prices? And is that more of a sort of a question coming from the legislature directly?
It is definitely coming from legislators. It's also coming from the regulated community and from interested parties. So I think there are a couple of different questions people are trying to answer. Definitely there's a lot of interest in retail gas prices. And I'll just say as an aside that we have not seen a strong correlation between Cap and Invest allowance prices and retail gas prices. Obviously, we think that there's a contribution there, but when the program first launched, allowance prices shot up, gas prices went up, and then in 2024, allowance prices got really low, gas prices stayed really high, and you've seen some points where the movements run opposite each other at various points, which just shows that it's not the main driver. So some people would like more information on that. Other people are just really interested in understanding the impact of policy decisions. Our market is very tight. Our slope of cap decline is 7% per year. Right. For the initial compliance periods. And so that's much steeper than other jurisdictions have done. And so I think there is interest in the regulated community in not necessarily taking our word for it, that this is an achievable cap decline rate. Of course, we set it based on some modeling we did before we stood up the program. But they want to see updated modeling now that we have some years of compliance under our belts to see, does this still look achievable or do we need to make adjustments?
Good stuff, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Mark, let's get to you. There's been a lot of anticipation for the ISOR and the rulemaking that is currently in progress, which was expected to be released at the end of 2024, and then further to that at the end of the first quarter, and there's been a bit of a language change there. Could you explain a bit of why the delay in the release of the ISOR?
I can say, as Leanne and Rajinder said from the stage earlier today, we're still working through a final package. We do expect to move forward with it this year.
Okay.
There are conversations going on at our legislature. We've seen spot bills proposed in both the Senate and in the Assembly that are indicating a discussion about reauthorization of the program. The governor's office has expressed an interest in those, so we know they're having conversations. So that's really just the context for the current legislative cycle. And we at the regulatory agency are just continuing our processes to develop and finalize a proposal for when that time comes.
So going back to your previous experience with rulemaking and formal rulemaking, has there been this level of legislative and governor sort of, not intervention, but interest and interface with you during this process of formal rulemaking?
Yeah, there really has, and that's what I alluded to some when I indicated that we kind of had successfully navigated a time of political uncertainty in 2016 and 2017, where we had a relatively extended rulemaking process. We saw that having some uncertainty, that uncertainty having some effects in the market, where we saw some undersubscribed auctions in 2016. I've also seen the other side of things when the legislation that was under consideration at that time was what turned out to be Assembly Bill 398, which ultimately was adopted in 2017. We were able to undertake a fairly expedited rulemaking to implement and incorporate some of the prescriptions that AB 398 lined out in a fairly compacted timeline during a 2018 rulemaking. So we had an ongoing rulemaking during, I think that was initiated in 2015, that ultimately was final in 2017. And then there was, subsequent to that legislation, a fairly quick timeline. So we have seen this type of interplay in the past.
And would it impact to the extent that it would alter some of the changes? Because ISO was supposed to be ready at the end of Q4. So would this kind of intervention change some of the things that you already had in place?
I really don't think I can comment on what could or couldn't be.
Right.
Certainly, if there is something that were proposed clearly in adopted legislation that would impact things, but we are just tracking those conversations for now.
But even things like, making a point about aligning the price ceiling, I mean, did you have that level of interest on these kind of details within the program in the past?
Related to the pricing, so we do have information on our webpage that gives summary of kind of expectations for this rulemaking. Consideration of the cost containment mechanisms is included on that. That's been included for the full kind of time we've been contemplating this rulemaking.
Right. No, but I'm talking about the 1207 that they've made the amendment where they've talked about price ceiling in there from the legislative body. So is that something that was opined on in the past?
We as staff at the regulatory agency have been considering the updates to the cost containment structure. One of the headlines for the rulemaking has been making the program more stringent. for various reasons. And we know that that has potential impact. So we're taking a holistic look, not just at the cost containment structure, but really the provisions that we've tabulated on our announcements, such that we're not looking at single mechanisms, but really a holistic, what would this program look like in the future if it were adopted?
All right, thank you. All right, let's go to talk through the part that about challenges that the programs have been facing. In terms of the Washington program, how much has the legislature sort of interfaced with you, and do you find that a challenge?
Yeah, the legislature comes to us quite frequently for technical assistance as they develop their legislation. And so we've been involved in some of the conversations around the bills that people are probably tracking, most importantly, HB 1975, which would change the achievement of our greenhouse gas reduction limit years from January 1st to December 31st. Mm-hmm. So that would reallocate some our allowance schedule, and it also changes the APCR. We've definitely been closely involved in those conversations. And then there's another bill that's moving right now that we have been providing support on, which is HB 1912, that deals with a more niche issue around exemptions for farm fuels.
Right.
Yeah, so yes, very closely involved.
Very closely, okay. And let me turn to you on Reggie. Do you expect more legislative intervention in the third program review, given we're in a different landscape, and as we talked about the affordability being a big question with states, do you expect there to be more legislative intervention and slowing down the third program review?
I think it's been pretty slow already. I'm not sure how much slower we can go, just off the record. No, actually, I think, don't want to make news here, but I do think the states are understanding that they're going to complete program review this year. That's certainly the intention.
Finish program review this year.
Yeah. So I don't anticipate a lot of sort of new legislation changing what the states feel they're coming to consensus around right now.
Right.
So that's the good news.
And that is the good news. And banking adjustment.
But that's not official. I don't speak for any state.
Right. Banking adjustment. Is there a plan to
I'm sure there's going to be a plan about bank adjustments.
Okay.
When this comes out.
When this comes out.
Yeah,
okay.
There will definitely be a plan.
Wonderful.
I can't say what I think that is. But,
all right.
Yeah.
All right. For Mexico, the challenge I know you alluded to it a little bit, but are the tariffs causing a bit of a challenge for rolling out the ETS and getting it up and running?
Definitely. That's going to be some of the main topics to be discussed with the industrial sector. I do believe that, however, this is a time to do something that proves to be bulletproof, let's say, that future administrations see the new ETS as a cornerstone of Mexico's climate policy. And I do think that the answer for that would be offsets. I do think that the use of offsets would prove to provide some consensus on how the new ETS works and the social benefits that it generates in some other parts of the economy. I do think that the whole role of ETS of offsets in other ETS has been somehow neglected, that we need to look over to the social benefits of offsets as a way to legitimize, let's say, the use of market mechanisms in developing economies. That's a lesson learned from both Colombia and Chile, both with tax and offset schemes. And offsets have proven to be a very important piece of those programs working and moving ahead.
Okay. let's look at our last section, which is looking forward. What conversations are you hearing that Mexico is having with the other jurisdiction? As you know, linkage takes forever, but are those conversations started already with some of the other LATAM countries to try to do this together?
Just exploring some conversations with other LATAM countries. I know that the Brazil relation is very important. Brazil having its ETS up and running in 2029, 2030. Mexico is looking to whatever is going on over there. And of course, WCI would be a very important hot topic for Mexico. I know that for a fact that the new administration did not have the time to engage in further conversations on a market-to-market basis.
Wonderful, thank you. And Andrew, on RGGI, you talked about electricity prices and, RGGI states having sort of benefited through the proceeds of RGGI. But have you considered emissions leakage? And is that a problem? Are you hearing from stakeholders that non-RGGI states are having a higher increased emissions compared to RGGI states?
The history of studying leakage has been a critical part of RGGI from the beginning. And we produce an annual electricity monitoring report that looks at the nature of where is the power coming from and what's the transition due to RGGI to, is there more imports and what is the nature of those imports? And report after report after report shows that the carbon intensity of imports is actually going down with RGGI over the years. And that's continued through the latest emissions monitoring report that was just released in the last 2 months. So the states aren't seeing that as a problem. With higher allowance prices, I think some stakeholders are starting to think that could become more of a problem, but it's not something that we've seen historically. And I don't know if we, in terms of sort of wrap up on RGGI, I would just say that, we're going to, as I said, program review, states want to complete that this year, but that this is been such a historically successful program. I think they realize, a term that was used on the other panel, how precious RGGI is. And all of them are committed to helping continue moving it forward. So.
And will emissions leakage be an important part of that discussion to prevent emissions leakage?
Yeah, I think as I said, the states are constantly watching for that and have not seen it as being a problem as yet, but it's being monitored.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn left and right. Joel, on linkage with California, Mark, what happens and if California is unable to finish their rulemaking this year? Does that push back linkage plans? I know you said 2026, 2027.
Right. Yeah.
I know it's a very speculative question.
Yeah, it's hard to answer that because it is speculative. But I will say that where we are right now is we are waiting until California and Quebec both have stable regs before we proceed with the linkage agreement process. And the reason for that is that Washington has statutory requirements of findings that we have to make before we're allowed to link. This is things like linkage doesn't harm our ability to meet our carbon reduction limits, it doesn't harm overburdened communities in either jurisdiction, and several other things. California has something similar. And so it would be difficult to do that assessment if the regs are going to change. But where we are now is we're keeping closely in sync with the California process. We actually recently took a step back in our linkage rulemaking. Mm-hmm. So we launched that rulemaking a few months ago, and because of the changes in California's timeline, it was looking like our linkage rulemaking was going to bump up against a rulemaking that we need to do for our second compliance period, right. Which starts in 2027. And so we took a step back and relaunched the rulemaking, and it's now linkage plus second compliance period. That buys us some more time and flexibility as we as we wait for California and Quebec to work through their processes. So at this point, we're still really confident in the timeline that we're working towards. We think a linkage agreement is most likely to be signed in 2026. And then we would start operating a linked marketplace either that year or the following year.
And so more in line with your second compliance period.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Although, I mean, important to note that our compliance deadline for our first compliance period is November 1st of 2027. And so if we start operating before then that still brings in access to those allowances prior to that first compliance deadline.
And would you be able to use pre-CCA allowances pre-2027 as part of the compliance?
That's a possibility, but that's not certain because that's going to be part of the linkage negotiation process, is whether it's going to be sort of 100% fungibility or whether there could potentially be limits on vintage years from other jurisdictions allowed for compliance in Washington.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. All right, Mark. On the rulemaking, let's say we still have the target, and we do, of 2025. What is the latest ISOR needs to be released in order for CARB to achieve a 2025 completion of rulemaking and a 2026 implementation?
I mean, I can step through what the formal process looks like.
Sure.
So after the release of kind of the formal proposal, which includes the regulatory text, the staff report that provides the rationale, the mandatory economic and environmental analyses, that's out for 45 days for public comment. We look to incorporate the feedback. Ultimately, that needs to go to a vote by our board and be adopted. That could be, a few months after the release. There's then the process of doing the final statement of reasons, which is kind of any adjustments based on direction from our board, and responding in writing to all of the the comments that we receive.
Right.
And then review by the Office of Administrative Law.
Right.
And we saw the LCFS program have a hiccup there. But once that approval is received, then the any changes, amendments to the program could become effective. So, the way to figure that out is to work back on minimum steps or minimum timeline for each of those steps. For, if you're looking at a 2026 effective date for January 1, that's the path to calculate out those dates.
Right, and this is all assuming it's all very tight. This is all assuming we don't have in between a 15-day requirement based on stakeholder comments.
Correct. There could be potential for minimal changes based on additional input, additional data that might be available.
Right.
That would then go back out for a 15-day public comment. We would again respond to those together with the responses to the comments that we receive in the 45-day comment period in the final statement of reasons.
Right. So looking ahead, what comes first in your mind? Rulemaking as an ISOR release or confirmation from the legislature on extension? What is necessary for the program in your mind?
I mean, I'm not going to provide conjecture on that right now. Both of those processes are happening in parallel.
Simultaneously. Yeah. Okay. And then there's one thing we've been hearing a lot from the market, and before I throw it open to questions, on how you communicate public information, because I know there's been a couple of instances where plans have been communicated at conference events, or there's this, change on your website, but not a market notice that has been sent out. So are you planning to change in your communication strategy to kind of suit out those wrinkles that have occurred in the last little while?
We always aim to provide like transparent, clear information. We have our channels where we do that, our email listservs that I'm sure people are familiar with, our public webpage. Hiccups can happen and confusion can happen. I always encourage people to pay attention to what is on our webpage for the most accurate information. There can be rumors, there can be confusion, but that's the source of the latest factual information that we have. Our strategy has been to aim to put that information out so that the full market can hear any major changes all at the same time and react to that. And that's the intent going forward.
All right, thank you. I had a bit of a rapid fire, but most of you have answered a lot of these questions. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I know we were 5 minutes late starting, so we could eat into your lunch a little bit. But are there any questions from the audience?
Hi there. Thank you all very much. This has been very informative. My name is Slade Rand. I'm with Opus. So we're kind of seeing affordability emerge as a pretty clear theme today. So far, it feels like with Chair Randolph speaking about how we need to tell this story better today. How much communication goes on between you all's agencies, as it seems like the Washington folks had to address this same problem very publicly throughout the past year? Is there coordination and messaging going on, or what does that look like to actually, tell that story?
Do you want to direct it to someone on the panel?
Sure, Mark, I'll start there.
I will say that, we are in varying degrees of conversation with the, potential for linkage that we announced recently. That's an important tool in my mind for cost effectiveness of our programs and just to expand the reach. And that plays into a little bit on cost impacts. So I will say that California and Washington are in more close communication, but I think collectively as a group of operators of emissions trading systems, there is an interest in understanding those impacts and sharing knowledge across different governments and different implementing agencies about how to address those. California has built-in mechanisms, allowance allocation to mitigate industrial leakage. We've given out on the order of $23 billion of value that gets filtered back through utility credits on bills to California customers, and that's a really important mechanism. So we do talk about these in bilateral, multilateral forums. There's probably opportunities to share more information with each other on that conversation. But there is some good discussions there.
Anyone else? Yep. It seems like we have one more.
I'll just say while the mic is making its way over there, I want to re-up a point that Chair Randolph made in her keynote address, which is also that when we think about affordability, we have to think about the costs of climate change and of air pollution, and she had some great numbers to illustrate that. And so I think what we're doing is a balance, right? We want to mitigate the consumer cost impacts of the regulations themselves, while also making as rapid progress as we can towards mitigating these climate disasters that also have a really high price tag.
Hi, Gabe Stoltzfus with C Carbon. I have another question for Mark. Sorry, you're a popular guy. So my question is, last year, Air Resources Board stated they would take out a minimum of 180 million allowances from the budget to 2030. Obviously, that's a very steep decline, even if you start January 2026. In a scenario where the cap, is not implemented in January 2026, that decline becomes even steeper. Is there a point where Air Resources Board finds that rate of decline to be, not conducive to a stable market? And would you consider, potentially changing how that is structured if the implementation doesn't hit in 2026 or January 2026?
So I want to provide one point of clarification. I thought I heard you say 180 million, and I believe the communication was a minimum of 118 million, 118. So that's an important piece. But there was also discussion about removing on the order of 180 million allowances. We had a handful of scenarios looking at this. And I think it's fair to say that, as we look at impacts to the program and current timelines, that's something that we want to make sure there's balance. So, I don't have any like specific notes there, but we would probably want to still maintain a certain minimum, and there's certainly going to be a weighing, again, a holistic weighing of trade-offs. When we're removing those allowances, we've got a lot of good uses for those allowances. That we set them aside for cost containment. We use them to refund utility customers. We use them to mitigate leakage. We use them to advance state priorities through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And there's conversations there that need to be considered in that whole conversation too.
Good. Well, that's fantastic. We're right on the hour. Well, thank you all. If there are no other questions, we will wrap up. Thank you all very much for your insights, for generosity in your time, and for being here. And thank you all. If you have any more questions, ask them directly. Don't go through me. But thank you very much.
Thank you.